This is St. Pete X, affectionately known as SPX. SPX brings you St. Pete's brightest business people, civic leaders, and citizens who share their insight and expertise as well as their love of our great city. SPX is presented by the St. Petersburg Group. Head to stpete.co to check out more episodes, and by St. Pete's most effective marketing agency, Big C. Browse to bigc.co to see their work. Now enjoy the conversation.
Hi, this is Ashley Ryneska, and I'm here today with Mayor Rick Kriseman. Mayor Kriseman, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Ashley.
And I did learn that you majored in broadcasting.
I did.
From University of Florida?
University of Florida. Go Gators.
So I have a feeling that by the end of this interview, somehow you will be interviewing me, and it will have completely gotten past me.
Well, I was a disc jockey, so I didn't do so much interviewing because I was typically on the radio from 2 to 6 a.m. or 3 to 8 a.m.
Ouch.
So not a lot of guests wanted to come in to be interviewed at those hours.
And so what's your musical genres?
Oh, man. I'm pretty much like all types of music. I mean, I can go from country to opera. So I just love good music. I love the lyrics. I think lyrics can be really powerful. I tend to look at the 60s and the 70s, but the 60s mostly, and the lyrics of the 60s and how impactful they were. And unfortunately, a lot of the lyrics we see today in some of the music is impactful in a bad way, which as a father of a teenager gives me great concern.
I feel like the lyrics of the 60s were a lot about social consciousness and about social responsibility, and it has changed. I have a 4-year-old, so I'm not quite yet. Right now it's Barney and it's I'm Big Bird, and the language is clean. Yeah. But I know in the next decade I'll have to contend with that.
It's scary, actually, some of the lyrics, what they encourage, and the there's a lot of bigotry, there's a lot of hatred that's certainly not what I want my kid to hear, or any child for that matter. And I think that's one of the reasons why even today you still hear music on the radio from the 60s and people still relate to it. I know I was at the Indie Market over at the State Theater a couple weekends ago, and the music they were playing was that generation of music. And I think they were playing it because the people that came there really could identify with the message that was in the music.
Right. I want to get into your childhood a little bit. And I know that you spent most of your childhood here in St. Petersburg, but your earliest years in Detroit.
Yes.
I'd love to understand what impression that experience left on you.
Yeah. So I grew up and you see the commercials sometimes for Chrysler, and they show 8 Mile Road and of course, Eminem in 8 Mile. And that's where I grew up, on 8 Mile. I do remember curfews and riots and the city burning. That's, in some ways, it was the kind of thing that you thought, well, that only happens in the South. But here I was in a northern city, and it was happening in the city. And I was very young. And so trying to understand everything that was going on was difficult. But it certainly spoke volumes to the challenges that we had in our country. And what's unfortunate is while we've made progress, we certainly haven't made as much as we should have.
Your father was a pretty important influence during those years.
Yeah, my dad, when we moved to Florida, he opened his own business back in Michigan. He used to work for Sony Corporation, but then we moved to Florida. He opened his own business. And yeah, that was a really powerful lesson. Is he always used to say to me, always take care of the people that work for you. If you take care of the people that work for you, if you respect and show them respect, they will give you 110% and they'll bust their humps for you. And so, I used to see him do little extra things for the people he worked with and that worked for him. Even when he was just walking in the plant, always talking to everyone, and not just, I'm the boss, you're a lowly employee, but saying hello to people, just simply waving and saying hello to people and recognizing and validating them, the difference that it makes. That was a powerful lesson. And I've tried to do that when I had my own law firm, when I worked at a law firm, and in my position as mayor, I try and always say hello to every employee that I see and validate them.
So in the vein of kindness and respect, you've had a almost visceral reaction to some of the national rhetoric, starting from the presidential election, that has ran very controversial threads of discrimination, threads of, at the very worst, hate. And there was a tweet and a Facebook post that sort of set ablaze. I think you got 2 million views.
Yeah, I never expected anything like that from that tweet. I think there was over 22,000 retweets of it. And, the response was, in some ways that I got, was very encouraging, but also very scary.
Tell us about the tweet and what you were responding to.
So this is right after Trump had announced back in December of 2015 that he was going to ban all Muslims. And as someone who's Jewish, my family came from Europe to the United States. And so, a lot of my family lived through the Nazi regime and all of that, and a lot of them didn't. To me, when you start singling out whether it's a religion or it's a race or a gender, that's very dangerous. And I thought his comments were just outrageous that a national candidate for president would make that kind of a statement. So my intent was to put something out that was equally outrageous, just to try and call attention to how crazy this was. Little did I know when I said, that I'm banning Donald Trump from St. Pete until I discover the danger posed by all Trumps. And I used that, especially the back part of it, to really try and convey that this was tongue in cheek, but at the same time, it was just calling attention to how absurd it was. Some people were like, yeah, well, thank you for doing that. Thank God for standing up and speaking out. And then the hate started. And the nasty phone calls and emails and messages that we started receiving that were, and I was shielded from a lot of them by my staff, who took the brunt, quite frankly, of a lot of the calls. And I did see a couple, and they were pretty awful. One of them superimposed my face on a Nazi concentration camp survivor.
Wow.
And the message was, you and your tribe are the real problem. Another one put the yellow star on my forehead, and that, even back then, really said to me that this campaign is making hate okay.
There's a permissive quality to it, perhaps.
There was, and there still is. And you look at, in light of what happened in Charlottesville and the comments or lack of comments by the president, and not specifically calling people out and calling groups out and talking about, both sides. And, that's giving permission for that kind of conduct and that behavior and that thought and the hatred to exist, and saying, it's okay with me if you guys do that. And that's, again, as a father, that's really scary, because I am really worried about the future of this country and the direction that we're headed right now.
It hasn't changed your transparency, though, in the least, in terms of potential backlash that you got from that social media post. You've continued to vocalize your ideology and your value system in less controversial ways. I think you've maybe learned something from that experience, but that carries over into your leadership, certainly with respect to our community, which you've still identified as suffering from divide to some degree. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk a little bit about what you've done in the South Side. And you've commented that in South St. Pete, it's not about equality as much as it's about equity. Yeah. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah. So when people think about equality, they're thinking about, you're trying to do things on an even playing field that are level, and that assumes, if you're talking about equality, that you already are at a place where you have equality. So if you're going to spend, and I'll just throw numbers out, if you were going to spend $1 million in one area of North St. Pete, you would spend $1 million in another area in South St. Pete. And because that's providing equality, it's putting the same amount on both sides. To me, you can't do that if you don't have equity first, and you don't have you're not already at a place of equality. And so I look at the investments that have been made in South St. Pete. I look at where we are in South St. Pete versus the rest of the city, and we're not in a place of equality. And so I think that means that you have to sometimes spend more to try and get to a place of equality and create real equity. So I think there's a real difference there. And 4 years ago, I was running for the seat, and I said that I always felt like Central Avenue was this historic divide between the city. And if you lived south of Central, you didn't receive the same attention, you didn't have the same opportunities, whether it was in jobs or in facilities or whatever it was. And so my goal has always been to, as I call it, break down that artificial barrier and create that through equity, get to a place where everyone has the opportunity, no matter where they live, whether they live south of Central or north of Central. And, I knew that it wasn't going to happen overnight. I didn't have any expectations that it would be something I'd be able to get done in a term. We certainly would do everything we could to start moving the needle, but we didn't get to where we're at overnight, and we weren't going to fix it overnight. And that's, in some ways, the hardest part, is having the patience to continue the efforts because you want it to get done overnight. You want to see that change.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, you have to sell the long game in much of the work that you do, and you have the vantage point of being involved in local and state politics, and you know the system, you know how it works, but maybe your constituency doesn't fully appreciate that, and maybe you have to do some overcorrection explaining the benefit of foundational systemic change. How have you been able to sell that?
Yeah, it's hard because, we, especially more today than we've ever been, we are a instant gratification society where we want things to happen. We want, everything happens quickly. Social media is fast. It's instantaneous. Everything's bam, bam, bam. And so the inclination of the population is we want to see change be the same way. And the reality is it rarely ever is. And so my approach, and I'm 16 years in public service now, my approach has always been kind of the same, is that first off, I'm not going to do what I think is politically expedient and what is going to help me win a re-election. I'm going to always try and do what I think is right. And if people agree with me that that was the right thing to do, they'll re-elect me. If they don't, then they won't. I've also tried to do it from the standpoint of putting the foundation in place so that if the things I hope to accomplish, that they still get accomplished, even if I'm no longer in that seat. We've gotten the boat going in the direction we need it to go. And even if I'm not there anymore, it's going to get to where we're trying to steer it to.
I think Dr. Ellen was speaking recently about the merger of All Children's and Johns Hopkins, and he mentioned that actually you coined the term hero's journey, and it was the 2-year plus period post that merger. And it wasn't just the long view. It wasn't just a plateau. It was grueling. Yeah. And he said in those 2 years, that's a really critical period. You not only don't see what you had expected to see, but you also get a tremendous amount of attrition. Yep. You get motivation and morale starts to be affected. And that's just the way it goes. And really the heroes are the organizations and the groups and the leaders who actually can guide their team through that.
Well, and that's really in a lot of ways goes right to the heart of what we've been trying to do south of Central with the way we've approached things. And, I've been real upfront and said, look, we're going to do it differently. We looked at the history of how things were done in South St. Pete, how were investments made, what was the effort to lift people out of poverty and to grow economically the community. And what we saw was the same thing being done over and over and over again. And as a result, you weren't seeing any real changes. And even, the Tampa Bay Times recently reported about that. And that was the same conclusion they came to. And so what we decided was we've got to try something different. And I encourage all of our employees, I get to meet with new employees all the time, and I encourage them, look, don't do it the same way it's always been done. Even if it worked, always look for a better way, something that's going to get you a better result. And don't be afraid to try something and have it not work, because that's how you learn and that's how you grow. And so what we've said is, all right, we're going to try, instead of just investing in appearance and buildings, which is the way it's been done in the past, we're going to invest in people and businesses. And so that's what we've tried to do with the CRA, which is the largest in all of Pinellas County, taking those resources that are being generated in that CRA and investing them back into people and into businesses. And, and the risk is, especially again, if I was concerned about reelection, you don't see it. We have to talk about it, and you can tell people about it and they'll go, hey, that's great. But a year later, they may have forgotten that you did that. Or even 6 months or 3 months later, they may have forgotten that you did that, because it's not something they can drive by every day and physically see as a reminder that reminds them that's how you invested your money.
It's interesting, I'm just going to use early learning, for example, and those efforts in South St. Petersburg. Part of the case is every dollar that's invested yields $6 to $9 in return to the community. And that's 20 years after the child leaves, the second or third year classroom. It's once he or she is employed and working in the community. And so if you look at the child scribbling, the letters on a piece of paper, it's not apparent what that investment's going to look like.
Yeah. If you're concerned about short-term return, then you would never do any of the things that we're doing, because we're not going to get short-term return for the most part. And in some cases, we will see a little of it, but what we're looking for is to start seeing trends happening and seeing the needle starting to move. And we're starting to see that a little.
I think you are. I think I recently read there's been a 174% increase in businesses over the last 3 years.
Yeah, in business registrations, yeah.
Through the CRA?
Yep. And roughly 400 new businesses have opened south of Central. If you drive down 4th or you drive down 22nd and you drive down 34th Street, you're starting to see the impact of our efforts. but here we are, we're 3.5 years, almost 4 years into it. And, it didn't happen in year one. It didn't happen in year two, but we laid the groundwork so that it would start happening because, again, our goal all along has always been to do things that are sustainable, that are going to last. Because I think what's happened to the community for too long is a lot of promises have been made. They'd get something delivered to them, and a year or 2 or 3 later, it's gone. And so, the community feels let down. It's like, you made us this promise and now it's not here anymore. And that's happened over and over again. And so we've been real deliberate in trying to avoid that. And, again, having to be that hero leader and say, hang with us, give us a chance to do this, and let's look at what we're trying to do and trying to accomplish and trying to get buy-in on that for the fact that, if you give us a chance, we could make a difference here and do it. But if we go back to the way we were doing it, we know we're not going to because we didn't.
What sort of support are the new businesses, so the 400 odd businesses that have opened in the past year alone, what support are they getting in terms of business acumen, in terms of financial literacy, if that's needed? Mm-hmm. What are you bringing to that specific community?
So a couple different things. We've got great partners and, government can't do it, nor should government do it on their own. And so you've got to have great partners, whether it's a partner like the Chamber of Commerce, who's been a fantastic partner with the city, or it's nonprofits, or it's a faith-based community. All of those entities, I think, need to be partners with city government in moving the city forward. And so we have a great partnership with the Chamber, and together have created the Greenhouse, which is a, kind of a one-stop shop where you can go in there if you've never opened a business before, learn how to put a business plan together, nuts and bolts from start to getting your doors open, where to go for financial resources. We can help with some startup funding. We've put money into the TBBIC, the Tampa Bay Black Business Investment Corporation, which also helps invest in new and existing businesses to help them grow. And so we've tried to create an atmosphere and an environment where entrepreneurs have a real opportunity of getting the information they need to learn how to open, or if they're already open, take that next step in their business and in that business's growth. And then the other thing that we've done is we have another partner, and this one's through the National League of Cities, has helped provide funding through a grant for us to open a financial empowerment center. And we've got some other partners, the United Way and Duke and Cross and Anvil. And so we've got a lot of folks that have come together here to really teach financial literacy. And initially, the thought was, let's just work with kids, but we got to work with their parents too. And so it's kind of an all-inclusive program to teach about how to earn money, how to save money, how to invest money, what to do with it, where to put it, and that's how we'll start making change in the community.
So you mentioned the Greenhouse, and I agree with you. That's a tremendous partnership. It's been very inspiring to see what's even happened with the 1 Million Cups event. Yes. And I think it's live streaming now, and I find myself missing it if I'm not watching. And what's really cool about it is seeing some of the businesses and personalities that we see on the street every day succeed. Yes. And you and I were having a conversation prior to recording and shared some of those names. And I'd love for you to share a story of a business and individual that you've witnessed flourish from the resources provided through the Greenhouse.
Yeah, so I'll give you two. And in fact, today we're doing a grand reopening for Rush Hour Chicken and Waffles on 34th Street. And this is a guy who is living his dream and opened a restaurant and got help from the Greenhouse and, went through the programs. And now we're doing a reopening because he has expanded. He has a full service bar that's going to be in there. Still has great chicken and waffles. If you love chicken and waffles, man, you got to check it out. But it's a great story. And then another one is Amy with Strands of Sunshine. And, I still remember when she opened in a small little storefront that I think it was on, I'm trying to remember if it was on 5th or 6th.
Sixth.
And she's in a much bigger space now. We've actually used her in some of our marketing efforts because to me, when we market the city, the best way to market the city is to tell the story of the people in the city and the businesses in the city. And she's just an example, again, of somebody who's utilized what we've offered through the Greenhouse and taken a business and really done some cool things with it. And, both her and Rush Hour, great businesses.
You were recently a part of an independent corridor mart. Tell me a little bit about that.
The city obviously is experiencing huge growth that's happened over the last couple of years. And while we're very excited and very pro-growth and we want to see the city continue to grow and create jobs and the economy thrive, we also want to be very aware of what makes the city special and the character that we have in the city. And really that is our small businesses. And in particular, you look at Central Avenue, which to me is kind of the spine of the city. And, the concern that I think a lot of folks had shared with me was it's all great that we're having this growth and we all want to see this growth, but we also don't want to lose our character and what makes our city special. And Central Avenue is a big part of that. And so we've done two things. We did a march to call attention to all of our small businesses along that corridor. We went from, I think it was 2nd and Central all the way to 31st and Central, which was a long march.
Got your exercise that day.
Yeah, I had the wrong shoes on. That wasn't a real thoughtful idea by me, but it really did call attention to the variety and the quality of the small businesses that we have that are along that entire corridor. And we kind of put an idea out on the table, and we put it out because we just wanted to create a discussion in the community and with residents, with businesses, with property owners, with developers. And that is, what do we want to look like? And how do we want to maintain what we look like? Do we want to do it via, as people often say, the carrot or the stick? Do you want to offer incentives to preserve the character, or do you want to use a stick and penalize or make it difficult for what we were calling formula businesses? And we don't even have a real definition yet for that, but people kind of think of it as a chain. So do we want to disincentivize chains? And so that's a discussion that's still ongoing, but it's a really important discussion because what makes St. Pete different, why I think people want to come here and visit, why I think people want to live here and stay here, is because of the uniqueness of our character and how you don't go down Central and see what you would see in every other city. You see businesses that you wouldn't see in other cities. And that's what makes us different. And it's equally important. It's something we're dealing with in our neighborhoods too. A number of our real historic neighborhoods, whether it's Old Northeast or it's Kenwood or Crescent Lake and Crescent Heights, they have some real concern about losing their character, seeing houses torn down and McMansions being built, or, in very historic neighborhoods, seeing modern homes get built that don't match the character of the rest of the neighborhood. So it is, I think, an issue that as a city, we're going to have to really work hard on and figure out how do we find that, as I call it, the sweet spot between continuing to grow, which is important because if you don't grow, then you start sliding backwards. So continuing to grow, but doing it in a smart way and in a way that respects our character and our feel.
And you really encourage the community to take a look at the issues around climate change. And so when we think about density planning and zoning, and you talk about downtown, which is the spine and really the core of business, and then we look at planning in the peripheral areas around downtown, how will your efforts and your focus on climate change sort of coalesce with that planning?
That's a great question because we are going to have to. And again, this goes back to something we talked about earlier, which is, you can do short-term gratification and not plan for the future and then have to scramble to deal with the ramifications of that. Or you can make some long-term plans that take time, but that really set you up for success for the long term that's sustainable. And so one of the things that I've talked about that I think we have to do, and it's something I want to do in my second term, is what I call a 2050 plan. Years ago, the city did its 2020 plan, which was a long-term plan to try and look at both neighborhoods and business and corridors and growth and plan for that. Well, its time as 2020 is upon us.
Can't believe it.
Yeah. For us to do a 2050 plan. And I think the timing is perfect because we already are going to be engaging on a integrated sustainability action plan to plan for the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. We're already embarking on a stormwater and sewer master plan. So all of these plans have to be integrated. They all have to work with each other. They can't be done in silos and separately, because what we do on our stormwater system and how we plan for that, or our sewer system, is going to impact how we plan for sea level rise and vice versa. And that's going to impact how we grow our city economically. And where can we grow? What is that going to look like? What's our zoning going to look like? Is everything going to have to be elevated? And are there areas where we really need to stay away from massive development because of what the future may hold? I'll just give you an example. The Rays are in the middle of looking for their long-term home in the Tampa Bay region. And one of the areas that's been suggested is the Derby Lane site, which has some benefits, but it also has some real challenges if you look at sea level rise maps and what that site is going to look like 20 years from now. And if you're going to build a stadium, you have to look at that. And so for them to utilize that site, they're going to have to, if that's the decision they made, they're going to have to implement plans that address the impact of sea level rise on that stadium 20 years from now. That's not always easy to do, is to look that far out, but we don't have a choice. We have to do those things. Another example of where we're trying to take into consideration climate change and sea level rise in what we're doing right now going forward is both the Shore Acres Rec Center that we're going to be rebuilding and the pier. Both of those structures are going to be built at higher elevations. They have to be, because if we don't, we are setting them and future city government up for having to deal with a significant issue that's going to cost millions and millions of dollars down the road. And so I think it's incumbent on myself and city council, and I feel very fortunate to have a city council who is not only supportive, but is also at times leading the charge. And that's great. It's a great partnership with us between my administration and city council on addressing climate change and sea level rise and issues of the environment. We have to plan, and all of our plans have to factor the impacts in so that we're not burdening future councils and future government.
So you have the city water master plan, you have the stormwater master plan, you've got the planning around climate change and the implications there. What does that task force look like and that process look like?
So it's really going to be consultant driven. And, a lot of times you'd see a consultant doing the sewer master plan, a consultant doing the stormwater master plan. And we're looking at making sure if we end up going with two, and I think we're on the verge of making our selection, if we did two, they have to be able to work together. Otherwise, we're just going to have one doing both of those because they have to be integrated. And when you think about it, if you do a good job of preventing stormwater runoff from going into the bay, it's got to go somewhere. And if you haven't taken care of your sewer system, then it's going to get into that system, which is what the heart of our problem over the last 2 years has been, is stormwater and rainwater intrusion into a sewer system that wasn't supposed to be there. So those plans have got to work together. At the same time, as you're planning for sea level rise, and you think that the higher our seas are, the slower when we have heavy rainfalls it is for that water to run off and to dissipate, which means that it's going to be, our grounds are going to be more saturated, and there's greater opportunity for that water to seep into our sewer system. Again, that's all interconnected. So all of these plans and all the consultants have got to be able to work together. I mean, we're actually kind of living that right now also with the new pier district. We had a group of architects who designed the pier and the pier head, and then we had a different architectural firm that was selected to handle the first phase of the waterfront master plan, which we call the uplands. But if those two firms weren't working together, we were going to have a real disjointed project. And so we've been able to get everybody working together. Even though they're two separate architectural firms, they're working together with the recognition that their projects are going to be connected, and they have to be connected, and they have to work together.
You had a really poignant statement around the pier recently. This new iteration of the pier is less about the pier as the icon, and it's really more about the waterfront as an icon. And that's a paradigm shift around this dialogue. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
I think where we got hung up with the first go around with the lens was the whole focus was on trying to build a structure that was iconic. And we got away from building something that was usable by the people who live in the city and by visitors to the city. And so what we set out to do was to put first and foremost the function of the pier and the pier district. That to me had to be the most important thing, with what it looks like almost secondary. I mean, obviously, you don't want something that's horrible and ugly on your waterfront, but at the same time, we felt like the primary driver had to be the functionality. And what we discovered as we went through this process, and certainly with the selection that was made by the committee, was, I think what came out of it was what's truly iconic about St. Pete, and in particular our downtown, is our waterfront park system. Very few communities in North America have a waterfront park system like we do. And I mean, I think we are so fortunate that our forefathers had the vision to protect the park system in the way that they did. And so this iteration of the pier really gave us an opportunity to add to what is the most iconic feature of the city, and that is our waterfront park system. And so while there will be a building at the end of the pier and a place to go fishing like there historically always has been, the focus wasn't so much on creating an iconic building, it was creating an iconic space. And I think we've done that.
So when we look at investment in the new pier project and much of what we've talked about in terms of city planning and reinvesting in our seawalls, our sewer systems, our roads, our sidewalks, knowing that this investment needs to be made and that we need to divert resources to this effort, naturally, in respect to fiscal administration, we're going to have to suppress spending in other places. Give me some thoughts as to where you think that balance needs to shift while we fix this issue.
That's a great question. And it's one that I hear a lot, especially when we're talking about the peer. There certainly has been a segment of the population that at one point in time or another said, "What? Don't build the pier right now. Take the money for the pier and use it on infrastructure." And the hard part has been trying to get people to understand that we are governed sometimes by the law, which requires us or prohibits us from using certain buckets on certain things. And so the pier, for example, a large part of the money that we're using to fund the pier comes out of what's called the in-town CRA, or in-town community redevelopment agency or area. And because it comes from that area, it can only be spent in that area. And so when people were saying to me, well, why aren't you using the money for the pier? Why don't you spend it on Southwest plant and increasing capacity instead, or on fixing our pipes? The answer was, because I legally can't. I can't use that money because those things that you're asking me to spend it on aren't located within that geographical area and that boundary. And so I can't spend it on that. And so we're having to look at other areas, and you're absolutely right. It means you have to make difficult choices. And, we're getting ready this November. On the ballot is the fourth round of Penny for Pinellas. And I cannot tell your listeners enough how important it is to vote in favor of that fourth round of Penny. First off, the money that comes into the penny isn't just from the residents of this area. It's anyone who visits us and spends money in our community. That penny of sales tax comes into our resources and gives us money that we can spend on infrastructure. And so it isn't just us paying it. It's visitors from out of state, from in-state, from across the bay. It's from all over that help fill up that bucket of money that comes to us through Penny for Pinellas. In years past, a lot of those resources have gone into libraries and rec centers and parks, and those are important things. But if you are heavy in your spending on those things and lighter on infrastructure, at some point in time, you got to pay the piper, and that time has come. We have got to really do some serious investments in our infrastructure. And so just to give you an example, what we're proposing to council, and what we've also heard from council, is for this next round of Penny, instead of somewhere around 40% being spent on infrastructure, we're going to recommend, and council, I think, is going to run with the idea of spending closer to 80% on infrastructure. And of course, that means that you don't have as much to spend on parks and the libraries and rec centers. And if it had been more balanced, then our spending could be more balanced. But historically, it wasn't. In fact, in Pennies round 2 and 3, the city spent zero on sewer system infrastructure out of those two pennies. Out of this round of Penny, we're recommending about 90 million of a total of 326 million, which is a pretty substantial amount just on our sewers. But we also have to spend it on stormwater. We have to spend it, as you said, on roads and sidewalks and bridges and seawalls, and buildings too that we have that are aging and need to either be rebuilt or renovated. So we've got to do it. It's a hard choice. It's not one that politicians typically like to make. You look around the country and no one has historically spent the kind of money they should be spending on infrastructure. As we like to say, you don't get to put a plaque on it with your name on it. Nobody's putting a plaque on a pipe that's buried underground. You don't typically do ribbon cuttings or groundbreakings for those things, but it doesn't mean they're not important, and they are important, and they go to everything. There's no quality of life. There's no economic development if you don't have good infrastructure.
Maybe it's a naming opportunity for every citizen of St. Pete to be able to play a role in what their community is going to look like and how it's going to operate and support future generations. And I don't imagine any of these decisions to be easy ones for you. And when you look at local government, I think you stated before that President Obama once addressed you with a group of your colleagues and said, listen, Washington's corrupt, Tallahassee or state governments are largely corrupt, and local government has a tough job. Yet, there's some freedom in authorship. There's some freedom in innovation. And with that comes some tough choices. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the culture of local government has morphed over the last 4 years and what you see for it down the road.
That's a great question. And I think President Obama was absolutely correct. And we have the opportunity on the local level, and we're the closest to the people, of being the innovators and to doing things differently and really putting policies in place that we couldn't get through in Tallahassee or other state governments or in Washington. And so some of the things that we've done here in St. Pete are putting in place and challenging all the business community to do the same. In city government, we put in place a parental leave policy. So if you are a woman or a man, you have a newborn baby, you're going to get 6 weeks paid leave. So you're not having to make those decisions at the most critical time to spend with your newborn child. Do I work and continue to be able to pay my mortgage or my rent? or do I stay home and worry about those things? We don't want our employees to have to worry about those things. We want them to be connecting with their child because that's going to lay the groundwork for that child's future. And it means when they come back to work, they're going to be better prepared, more energized, more enthusiastic than they would have if they were worrying. We raised the minimum wage and we've created a 15 by 20 challenge. So we will be at $15 as our minimum by 2020. And again, we've challenged the business community, and companies and organizations like the Tampa Bay Rays have taken that challenge on, and they're doing the same thing, and they're implementing those policies. We've created second chance policies for our kids and hard to hire ordinance for our adults. So if you're a kid and you make a mistake, that's a misdemeanor, it's not a violent crime, you're going to get a second chance. You're not going to have an arrest on your record that's going to be with you for the rest of your life. You're going to have to do community service. You're going to get some counseling. It's going to be immediate. So there's an immediate penalty for your conduct, but you're going to have that second chance that you need. And for an adult that's done their time, paid their dues, want to come back and have a chance of being someone who contributes to our city, we've got a hard to hire ordinance that council passed that will require companies doing business with the city on construction projects, for example, to have to hire a percentage from those who've made a mistake in the past to give those folks a real opportunity. And so those are things that we can do on the local level that, state governments are unwilling to do or just don't have the political will to do.
You also have the ability to identify synergies both within local government and throughout the community. So when you look at our public sector, our private sector, and opportunities for more effective collaborations, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we've got, again, because we're closest to the people, it gives us the opportunity to really look for those partnerships. And I think we've been really successful over the last couple of years at working with, I mentioned before, the chamber, with nonprofits. And in fact, Councilmember Nurse has been working with a group of nonprofits trying to create a collaborative to work on issues of affordable housing, for example. It's a real opportunity to get everybody on the same page, going in the same direction in that respect. The faith-based community has been fantastic partners with the city on a number of efforts. The Not My Son program, for example, where we had a rash of violence and homicides involving our youth. We created this Not My Son program to try and reduce violence in the community, and the faith-based community picked it up and ran with it. And on Friday nights at various churches all around the city, pastors and priests and rabbis and all religions were going out and knocking on doors and asking parents and kids to sign a pledge to use words instead of violence to solve problems. And, so it's those partnerships, but it also has to be partnerships with governments. And so in the last 4 years, I think we've got better relationships today than we had previously with Pinellas County. And as a result of that, we've done projects together, from wage theft, where we're working on that together, to rapid rehousing, to the ferry, where they were a partner with us. We've done partnerships with Tampa, the city of Tampa, and Hillsborough County. And the ferry, again, is a great example of where, when we think beyond our borders and look to build relationships beyond our borders, we can accomplish a lot more. We also know that state and federal government, when it comes to grants, don't want to just give them to a city. They are looking for partnerships. They're looking for whether it's a countywide approach where the city and the county are working together, or a regional approach where St. Pete and Tampa, or St. Pete, Tampa, Pinellas, and Hillsborough are all working together and putting that grant application out. We know we have a much better chance of success if we are working at forming those partnerships. So that's something that I've worked really hard to create those relationships and build those relationships, because I think in the long term, it's going to serve our community really well. Mayor Buckhorn and I have spoken at a number of different events and forums, and we both say the same thing. You'll hear us both say, when we work together as a region, we can compete with anyone in this country, with any other region in this country. When we are competing against each other, each of us is at a disadvantage against other regions around the country.
Who has a better sense of humor, you or the mayor of Tampa?
We have a different sense of humor. And Bob and I have been friends for about 20 years. We are good friends, and I appreciate what he's doing over there. I think he's made tremendous strides in Tampa at really bringing their waterfront back to life and bringing life back to downtown Tampa. In some ways, Tampa and St. Pete had opposite challenges. They've got lots of office, but not enough residential. And so 5 o'clock, they're downtown closed. we have lots of residential, not enough office in downtown St. Pete. And so we want to get more business in downtown St. Pete in addition to all the residential we have. But Bob's got a good sense of humor.
A theme that I've gleaned from this conversation is really an emphasis on collaborations, on partnerships. You aren't a mayor that insists on doing it completely alone. In fact, you look for support, you look for experts in specific fields. And I'd like you to talk about that shift in leadership strategy.
Well, I've always been a big believer that, first off, when it comes to leadership, that the best leaders surround themselves with the smartest people they can find, and they empower those people to feel confident in expressing their opinion, even if it might be something that the leader doesn't want to hear. And so I've tried to do that. But I also think that great leaders recognize that you're more powerful when you are able to collaborate, when you're able to have partners and get buy-in. And as such, I've worked really hard at building relationships with other elected officials around the region, with other governmental entities, with other organizations, because I truly believe that we can accomplish more when we're all working together than when it's just about me. And the same thing, if you look at how the city has marketed itself, it isn't commercials and marketing pieces that are just, there's Mayor Kriseman, rah, rah, rah. It's let's feature people in the community and let them tell their story and why they love St. Pete. Because I think that's a lot more impactful than it is the mayor just spouting off about himself and, what he's done for the city. It's letting people tell their own story of why the city is great and how this city has given them opportunities, and city as a whole. It's not city as the mayor.
You've also been lauded for the hiring of Deputy Mayor Tomlin and also Chief Holloway. And I'm curious as to what characteristics sort of rise to the top when you're selecting those that serve most closely to you.
Those are obviously two of the best hires I could have ever made. And I caught a lot of flack initially when I hired Chief Holloway. And there was some characteristics, certainly in a police chief, and I believe that's the most important hire a mayor can have, because public safety sets the tone for everything, for neighborhoods, for quality of life, for economic development. If you don't have good public safety, you have a problem with all of those things. And so there were certain boxes that I had to check off in order to make sure I had the right person. Community policing was so important to me. I felt like we had gotten away from it. We had to bring it back, because I really felt like the community and the department had lost faith in each other. There wasn't respect. There wasn't a relationship. And I felt like community policing would bring that back. And when I met with Holloway, I was absolutely convinced this guy has a plan for how to bring it back. And I think he's going to be able to accomplish it. I also wanted an officer or a chief who was not someone who would be holed up in their office, that would be out in the field and getting down and dirty with the men and women who he oversees, and wears a uniform, not just a suit. So I actually asked, one of the questions I said is suit or uniform, office or patrol car. Questions like that seem kind of silly, but they really tell you about the kind of philosophy that chief had. And I think we hit a home run. And it was, again, it would have been easy. I narrowed it down to 4 just to choose one of them. Certainly one was a favorite of the community. And I would have made a lot of people in the community happy, but I didn't feel it was in the best long-term interest of the city. And so I was willing to take the heat to do what I thought was the right thing long-term for the city, even though it might not have been the politically expedient thing. I got no pushback on Dr. Tomlin. I mean, anyone who's ever met Kanika knows that this is a brilliant woman. And she has been a partner. The way I look at her is she is my partner. I can't do everything. I can't be everywhere, and at least do it well. And to have somebody like her that I can rely upon, that I can say, hey, there's something that I'm really interested in us pursuing. I just don't have the bandwidth to do it. Would you take it on as your project? Or having someone who comes to me and says, hey, Mayor, I have this idea. What do you think about this? And I'm like, oh my God, that's a great idea. Let's do it. Would you spearhead it? And her saying absolutely and running with it, and then doing a knockdown, bang out job with it.
She absolutely does. And in that vein, we're getting close to the end of the show, and we have a shout out that we like our guests to provide to an individual or an entity or an organization that maybe doesn't have a tremendous amount of visibility or eyeballs on them. This is a hard one for our city leaders to select, and to pick just one may be painful.
Wow. Yeah, you get in trouble when you pick one. I always love, well, what's your favorite restaurant? And it's like, so whoever I don't select is going to be upset with me because I didn't pick them.
But who you do select, free meals for a month, baby.
It's, I was asked yesterday on an interview, what's one of my favorite places, or what do I think is one in the top 10 things to do in St. Pete? And my answer was stroll down Central Avenue, because you will see so many individual, unique businesses, galleries, restaurants that are all different, and they're all outstanding in their own way. And I mean, I'm a frequent visitor, and I love to just walk down Central and just go into shops. A lot of times I've got certain places that have become my go-to for gifts, because I always find something there, or, I want to get something great to eat that I got a craving, I go there. We're lucky we've got some great nonprofits that are working really hard in the city, and are a lot of them doing things behind the scenes. And we just opened another great craft brewery at Flying Boat down this last weekend, who just came into the community, but the same day they're doing their opening, they've got Friends of Strays there. And, and so they're doing something for that organization, which, that's, I think, this isn't answering your question, but the thing that I love about this city, that I think makes this city so different than so many other places, is the level of collaboration and support between the business community themselves, the nonprofits themselves, and the business and the nonprofits. You don't see that everywhere. All the craft breweries support each other. The restaurants support the craft breweries, who support the businesses, who support the nonprofits. I've never seen such a network of everybody trying to help everybody else, recognizing that if one is successful, the other is going to be successful, and we're all going to be successful. It's really remarkable.
Absolutely. And in that energy, I may put you on the spot and ask you to close this show out with maybe a verse or two from a 60s song that encapsulates that spirit.
A 60s song. My guys always get mad at me when I quote songs, because
this could be wrong. No one Google this.
Oh, there's a couple songs, and they aren't 60s songs, though, that have come into my head recently. They're actually country songs, and it's one of the reasons I like country music is because the lyrics are great. Ironically, they're both Garth Brooks songs. The one is about standing outside the fire. Life isn't tried, it's merely survived. If you're standing outside the fire, sometimes you have to jump in and take the chance. You might get burned a little bit, but if you don't, you're just surviving. The other is about unanswered prayers. And the line is, sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. Remember, when you're talking to the man upstairs, that just because he doesn't answer doesn't mean he don't care. And I think a lot of times in life, we get upset about things that we prayed for that we don't think happened. But sometimes we're so much better off because they didn't. We go and a different door opens that takes us in a much better place.
A wonderful note to end on. Mayor Kriseman, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You made it to the end of another great episode. For show notes, head to stpete.co to the show notes page, which includes links to all the resources mentioned in the show, as well as quotes and key insights from the show and information about the guest and the host. Thanks again to our sponsor, Big C. Head to Big C, that's BIGSEA.co, to check out their work. And if you like what you heard, make sure to share this episode on social media and leave a comment. See you next time.